Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started, and others can continue to join us along the way. Welcome to Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, and welcome to the National Federation of Families Conference. And hopefully you are enjoying the conference thus far and enjoying the fact that we are via Zoom, and hopefully the impact of all of these sessions hasn't been lost on the fact that we are not together in person. So again, welcome. I want to introduce myself. I am Lisa Kennedy, and I am presenting this topic to you from two different lenses. One, I am professionally a family peer support specialist with the York County Department of Human Services, and that is located in Pennsylvania. So I'm coming to you from South Central PA today, and I am also a single mother of 4 adult children. I am a former foster parent and an adoptive parent. I'm also a grandmother of 5 children. So a lot of what I share with you today is not only coming through my work with families, it's also coming through personal experience. And there'll be some pieces that connects to education, as I also am a school board director in our local school district as well. So I wear many hats and bring diverse experiences to this topic of conversation. And so the first thing I'm going to ask is that, make sure my screen can advance. Here we go. And so far, I see about 39 of us that have joined us so far. And if you would, for me, please, just so I have a sense of who's in the audience, so that when we are talking about experiences or asking questions and responding, we give the appropriate context so we know who's in the audience. So I see Michelle and if I pronounce it right, Camus, have also entered into the chat box. So if you would please put your name and what role you are serving in joining us today. Are you a grandparent, or are you a staff person that has the pleasure of working with families? Just so I have a sense of who's in the room, and when we're talking about experiences, share some examples and information that is pertinent to you. And also you can put in your location where you are from across the country. So we have Michigan and North Carolina in the house. Thank you everyone for your quick responses. And I want to send a special shout out to those who may be joining us today as a grandparent or serving dual roles as well. Our jobs are definitely cut out for us. So I see some other family support specialists across the room. Great. I see some joint planning team facilitators. I see case managers. So we have a great mix today. So I'm going to allow you to continue posting in the chat what role you're representing here today. And again, welcome. So let's get started. We're going to be covering several different areas within our time today. And because we are covering so many different areas, it's going to be an overview, high level, some detail in certain areas, and more specifics as maybe questions come into the chat box. And I also understand you have the ability to unmute yourself and speak. So I welcome questions along the way. I do have a halfway checkpoint set that we can take any questions that either may be in the chat box, or if you want to hold your question until that time. So about halfway through, I'll do a check-in and take some questions and or comments and thoughts. And then again, at the end, we will certainly have some time to do some questions at that time. But I do welcome questions and comments along the way as we engage with one another today. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk a little bit about stages of the journey. We're going to focus a little bit on communication, not from the typical lens as we think about communication, being positive, education, stakeholders. We're going to talk a little bit about some statistics around grandparents raising grandchildren. We'll talk about the family experience. We'll hit on technology, self-care, preparing for transitions, having an awareness of surroundings, and engaging families, and then we'll end with some Q&A. So let's get started. So out of the starting gate, I just want to hear from you real quickly. What are some of the common challenges that you may be experiencing currently, either in your role as a grandparent within your family, or if you are someone who is serving someone in this capacity? What are some of the challenges or experiences that you are currently having? And you're certainly welcome to unmute yourself. I'm going to click on my chat box so I can see if anyone posts them in the chat box, but I just want to hear from you. So building support systems, okay. Anyone else? What are some of the challenges? Respite care, getting child welfare to understand our role. That's huge. Generational differences, absolutely. And just so you know, I actually have do two versions of this presentation. This version today that I'm sharing with you is the initial version, and then I do have a 2.0 version, which is looking a lot deeper into some of these specific issues, and there is a specific focus on the challenges of the generational gaps and some of the other things that have been mentioned as well. So bridging the gap between grandparent and grandchild and that relationship, absolutely. Connecting grandparents, raising grandchildren with substance exposure. So these are some great ideas, and we will touch on a couple of these. Use of technology. Thank you, Sandy. We will touch on several of these along the way. There are a few that really relate to the 2.0 version, and if time allows, I'm happy to cover some of those areas, but I do want to respect our time, and you can keep adding in the chat box as well, because I am noting them in hopes of being able to highlight in some way. Physical challenges. Okay, so you're welcome to keep adding in that chat box. I'm going to go ahead and get us going here. And thank you for your willingness to engage. So let's talk real quickly about some statistics. And again, keep in mind that some of the basic statistics I'm going to give you right now are from Pennsylvania. They are specific statistics that are available, of course, by your state. And then I do have a few national things here to share with you as well. So if you think about specifically in your own state, I'm going to share in Pennsylvania, latest data says as of 2017, there were 90,000 grandparents that were responsible for the basic needs of children under the age of 18. And as you think about that, that is a lot of families that are impacted. But exactly how many children does that mean? So that means that 90,000 grandparents for Pennsylvania, they are raising approximately 195,000 children in Pennsylvania. And that's as of 2017. So that potentially could be a little higher as we currently sit in 2021. And this is about 7.5% of all the children in the state of Pennsylvania, which seemingly may not seem like a very high percentage, but 195,000 are a lot of children to be serving and being raised in the setting of grandparents versus being raised by biological parents. And that's over 20% of these families specifically are living below the poverty lines. And that is one of the challenges that a lot of our families see and experience due to the impact of sometimes second generations raising grandchildren. So poverty plays a huge role in some of this. And then statistically looking at some of the reasons why grandparents may be raising grandchildren, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means, these are just some of the things that were at the top of the list. So you're looking at divorce, substance use disorder and abuse, terminal illness of some type, mental and emotional distress, and incarceration. And those are just 5 or 6 of some of the major topics or reasons why grandparents may be raising grandchildren. There are certainly several other reasons why that could be the case. And specifically in Pennsylvania, African-American children are more likely to be being raised by grandparents. And that is a rate of 12.2%, which is much higher than the national average. So keeping that in mind, and the financial piece and the cultural piece, we won't really focus on again in this particular presentation. It is a part of my 2.0 version, but the financial impact is huge. And actually I did receive 2 questions in advance of our presentation. And so I did add 1 or 2 things at the end to respond to the questions that were placed in the app in advance as well. And we'll get to those at the end. And then looking at some national statistics, over 13 million children in the United States are being raised by grandparents. And you look at the top 4 states across the country that have the highest rate: Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Alabama. And you notice, all of those are southern states. And, we don't know what role that specifically plays, but they just happen to be 4 states that are across our southern half of the country. But there are a lot of children that are being raised across the country by grandparents for various reasons, and sometimes also multi-level, multi-generational levels residing under one home as well. So let's talk a little bit about the stages of the journey. Excuse me. So when you think about the stages of the journey, and I'm sure most of us, particularly that are here in some staff capacity, have heard of the doing for, doing with, and cheering on process. But as it relates to the work that we're doing, we want to think about where these families are that we are serving along that journey. And there are going to be a large number of families where we are in the stage of the doing for. And that's really where we are doing probably mostly everything for them. We are advocating for them. We are seeking information for them. We are making connections for them. We are securing resources for them. We're making connections for them. There are positions and times when we run into families that we are serving that may be further along the journey. But experientially, there are a large number of families that are sitting in that doing for stage, particularly if you are working with grandparents where this is an onset, meaning a new situation that they're going through. This was not a planned circumstance where they find themselves raising their grandchildren. So the need is going to be much greater. And then when you take a look at the doing with, that's at the stage where you're actually, as a staff person, finding it a little bit more easier to walk alongside that family, where they're able to stand with you and in some cases help you advocate and or speak on their behalf. This is where the family is learning to develop their own voice, learning to understand how to navigate systems, learning to understand how building a network of support for themselves and for their family, and really teaching others how to be successful in this thing called working across systems. And particularly when you are working with families that are being served across multiple systems. And we know the challenge of managing one system, but we do have a large number of families that are working across multiple systems who have expectations that they need to meet across 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of systems, and the challenge therein that they find themselves in at that time. And then moving on to that cheering on phase, and that's where we hope to really move families to, where they are actually found their voice, know how to utilize their voice, know how to ask those appropriate and effective questions. They are able to support themselves along the way. And when I say support themselves, what I mean is that they are able to understand navigating those systems. They're able to ask the important questions. They've mastered some of the skill sets that are needed in managing these systems, they are able to be a full team partner in that process of supporting that family. And therefore, they are at a place where they can almost self-advocate and be less of a challenge to staff and the team along the way as well. Sharing the family experience, and when you think about a couple of things we're going to share here, these are some of the things that specifically for grandparents may be new experiences, a new journey for them, particularly in this day and age. Sometimes you find that you may be working with grandparents that may be typically younger than what we may have had as grandparents growing up, or you may find that you have elder grandparents that are raising grandchildren, and the generational differences and understanding of what they need to engage in is different. So think about as team members, including them, because they matter. And sometimes it's just as simple as inviting them to that conversation, inviting them to join you in that meeting, inviting them to ask questions. Inviting them to the table is important, even though they might be the reason you are at the table. Sometimes families are concerned about their value at the table. And because they may be working with various systems, families come to us with a preconceived notion that because they need a service, they aren't capable or have anything valuable to add at the table. And so we want to make sure that we offer them the opportunity to be partners with us at the table. And then also asking them what they think. Their opinion matters. They're the ones that are living through this experience, even though they may have expectations and goals based upon what the requirements of the system is that they are working through. But their opinion matters, and what they are going through really matters. And we want to know what they think. What are they experiencing? From the lens that we may be at the table at, we may only be seeing the high level experience for them, but we're not there on the day-to-day basis to be able to see and understand what a family is actually going through. So asking them their thoughts and their opinions, and sometimes clarifying whether they share an experience or a need or a desire doesn't necessarily mean that the system can accommodate that need. It just means that they have the opportunity at this point to be able to share what their thoughts and feelings are, what they are experiencing, what they think about the process, what they think about a service you may be recommending. Their input really does matter, and we want them to take ownership of this journey as well. And then defining meeting etiquette for families. And sometimes we make assumptions about some of those pieces as well. And I'm very clear with families that I'm working with and understanding that we want them to understand the importance and the value of the time of the others that are joining you in this team process as well. So we want families to understand the importance of meeting deadlines, the importance of being on time, the importance of making contact if for some reason they need to change their appointment or cancel or reschedule, and not just waiting till a couple of days later and not calling into the office and canceling that appointment or rescheduling it, or letting them know they may not necessarily need that appointment any longer, whatever the case may be. But really being clear about understanding for families that here are some things we really want you to understand so that you can be successful and that we can best serve you. So sharing some of those basic tips sometimes, and highlighting for families that sometimes we do make assumptions that they know, but sometimes it's jogging that memory and making sure that we highlight the importance of being on time and coming to meetings prepared, and how to be prepared for that meeting based on what the need of the meeting really is. Checking in with them. Thanks, Mary, for your comment. I'm going to let me finish this section on family experience, and then I'll go back and check your question and see if we can take care of that. Checking in with them is important, because a lot of times families are For instance, working across multiple systems, and we know that almost every system has some sort of plan and goal that goes along with their journey within that system. And so if a family is working with 2 or 3 systems and they have a service plan for all 3 systems, they may have a world of goals and expectations that are being placed on them, and no one is checking in along the way to make sure, 1, that they understand what's being asked of them, 2, they understand who needs to do the work of that goal on that plan. Is it the entire family, or is it just a child, or who is doing the work within that goal? And then making sure that when you check in, there's some clear understanding around what is expected, and time just doesn't pass where you show back up and say, it's been 30 days. Have you, achieved goals 1 and 2 based on this plan? When no one has really checked in along the way, no one has really said to that family, do you have any questions? How you doing? Do we need to make any changes? So checking in is important. And also allowing that family to ask questions along the way, and allowing that family to be able to say, hey, I just don't get it. And being okay with hearing that someone doesn't understand and doesn't get it. And so giving them permission to be able to be confused, permission to be able to ask those questions, permission to be able to say, hey, I just need to figure out, are we going in the right direction? Or even to say, this just isn't working for us. So allowing them the opportunity to check in and ask those questions and be able to respond to you as the team is appropriate as well. So let me take a look at Mary's question here. Mary says, I struggle with the same systems entering our homes and feeling that they continue to criticize us. 20 years ago, I was a parent. Feels like not much has changed. And if anything, the strength base has gone out the window. Grandparents matter. Absolutely. And I certainly, I hear your frustration and I sense your frustration, which is the reason why I, through my own personal experience and working with families, developed this training. And the specific focus in the beginning of this training was really for staff and systems, to really talk through allowing them to hear what families are really experiencing, be they grandparents or no matter the role the family is playing. It's really understanding that for a lot of staff that serve on teams and serve within systems, they aren't family members. And there is a difference in finding that understanding from being a staff person versus being a family member, or versus being the individual being served within the system. It matters and makes a difference. And when you hear those experiences from a family member's lens or an individual being served, it makes a difference on how that staff person or that team continues to work with you and continues to support you and continues to understand how to best serve you. Because there are a lot of cases, and again, I'll speak from my own personal experience along these journeys, who I have with my children over the years have worked through so many different systems. And I'll just say in Pennsylvania, there isn't a service at this point that I have not worked with. But a lot of times when staff are coming in to work with families, the assumption is that we don't know anything, or the assumption is because we have a need that we may not found value in our role and understanding who we are. So really the importance of this presentation as initial inception was to really help staff understand what the experience is like for grandparents and or family members who are going through systems, who are in most cases sometimes maybe engaging in systems for the first time, maybe needing to learn about how your system works, what are the expectations, and then you are in a whirlwind when you're thrown into these circumstances, and especially when it isn't something that grandparents may see coming. And so experientially, I certainly understand what you are experiencing, Mary, and That is the reason why we are here today, to really sort of have these conversations and really talk candidly about what families really experience, and learn to understand and respect each person in their place that they sit at the table. It's so important to really be open to that along the way. So communication, and sometimes when we think about communication, we think about being an effective communicator, and a lot of us think that we may be effective communicators, and that's not necessarily the focus we're going to take today. But in thinking about effective communication, really takes three things. It's two-way, it's meaningful, and it's ongoing. And so as we think about those keys to communication, here are two areas that, as it relates to how we serve families, specifically grandparents, that sometimes aren't one, explained effectively, and we don't make the best use as systems of these processes. So highlighting surveying families. And so usually this is where we are doing these things beforehand. We might, provide families with surveys if they have certain challenges, or if we are attempting to meet a need, or if we want to find out what it is that they want, whether it is the grandparent or whether it is the child. We're surveying them in some capacity to find out information from them. And so if we're taking the time to provide them with a survey, seeking information and input from the families, we want to make sure that we value that time and that input, and we pay attention to what it is that they share. Because most of our systems in some capacity survey families for an array of reasons. Most easily thought about is probably the education system, where in the school setting, there are usually tons of opportunities for families to be surveyed for different needs at different times throughout the school year. And families provide their input, usually around whether they like the program, or there's something that they need. And if it's more specific to their child, is the school really meeting the needs of your child? And the family is then providing their input about their experience along the way. And there are oftentimes families never hear anything in return. Systems come to families and they say, we have this survey that we'd like to hear from you. Would you please complete this survey and turn it in, or do it online and submit it? But in a lot of cases, we never hear back. Families never hear back what is done with the information that's provided. So when we think about surveying families and or completing evaluations, which are the pieces that are typically done at the end of a service, where we're looking at the deliverables, how did we do? Did we hit the mark? Did we miss the mark? What was your experience? What could we do better? What would you like to see in the future? Do you have any suggestions for future topics? Do you have any suggestions of ways we maybe could do this a little bit better? Could you tell us one or two things you learned about the experience? And so when families take the time to complete those surveys or complete those evaluations and turn them into you, it's important to make those surveys and evaluations living, breathing documents. And what I mean by living, breathing documents is making sure that there is some two-way communication. So if you are asking questions of families and they are providing you input, how are we following up with them to let them know that we've heard what you said? Are we then letting families know that those evaluations or those survey results are going to be tabulated, and you can find this information on our website, or you can look for a handout to be sent home with your child from school? You can expect to hear from us individually. What's going to happen with the information that they provide? Because sometimes there is some really meaningful stuff that families share with us, and we as systems, because we have requirements to obtain feedback from families, we don't always do our best to follow up to ensure that we are responding properly, we are answering questions, we are hearing from families, and we are acting upon the input that are shared. Because in most cases, if you ask families, they're going to be honest with you, and they're going to tell you whether the service that they've recently experienced was successful. They're going to share with you if they've had some challenges. And that is where you take that information and you use that information, which we should be doing, to move us forward. Because there's no point in asking them to complete a survey or an evaluation, and we never use the information that's shared back with us. Clear expectations, and this is key because sometimes, particularly when grandparents, if this is a new experience for them and working within systems and understanding that each system has different expectations, and those expectations may be requirements, particularly if they're working in a system that may be court ordered, something of that nature. There are things that are clearly defined and must be done at all times. So when expectations are being developed, we want to be clear. We want to be prepared for the expectations. There's no reason why that there should be expectations that are provided to a family, and we're not aware whether that family is prepared to be able to meet those expectations. So we want to make sure that they have whether it's the information, whether it's the skill set, whether it's the connections, making sure that that family is prepared to be able to meet the expectations. It's great to have a list of expectations, but if no one's taken a look at the capacity and the ability of that family to be able to achieve those expectations, we're doing nothing but wasting your time as staff and wasting the family's time as the one who is supposed to achieve these specific goals. So be thoughtful and be inclusive. When appropriate, allow family to participate in the development of those expectations. You get more buy-in, you get a lot more ease and accomplishment. And because the goal is we want them to be successful. We want them to be able to see themselves making progress as well, not just identified by what we may say as a system or as a team, but we want families to be able to also recognize that they've made some improvements as well. Also, it helps to identify next steps and knowing where we're going and being able to be clear with that. And sometimes with young people, those are some of the questions that we get. They want to know where we're going. They want to know the why. And so if the expectations aren't clear and they aren't understood, we cannot really clearly answer or respond to that why appropriately. And then also having clear expectations that ensures that we are building champions of strengths, because expectations should really be aligned as close and as best as possible to an individual and or a family's strengths. And if we are building and creating expectations that are recognizing a challenge that an individual and or a family may be experiencing, we want to make sure that we also include some expectations that ensures that they build success. Because if we continue to create documents, plans, goals that are beyond one's capability, whether it's an individual or a family, of achieving, it ensures that one thing, it ensures that they will be returning. So what is our ultimate goal? We want to build champions of strengths, and in doing so, those clear expectations are communicated effectively. We were inclusive of those that are working with those expectations and have the responsibility of completing those expectations along the way as well. And then there's that piece of communication when we take a look at teens, and we know what it's like when kids start to hit that preteen age, or excuse me, or high school, where things are going a little haywire, relationships are beginning to be really sort of further refined in some cases and defined in other cases. Kids are beginning to really learn who they are and understand this thing called the future, and deciding on whether what their focus is going to be beyond high school and all of those things. So there's different ways to take a look at communicating with teens. And so I have a list of things here. I won't highlight all of them for the sake of time, but there's just a couple I want to highlight and point out to us. So as we think about self-control and controlling, And we know that self-control and controlling are clearly two different things, but for young people, it's really different. Someone's saying they can't hear me. Let me turn my volume up. Is anyone else struggling hearing me? You can unmute yourself and answer if you would, please.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So self-control and controlling, when we think about self-control, it's really getting teens and young people to understand as they're moving into that pre-teen age, understanding that there's something called internal controls. And we want them to begin to understand that we have a range of emotions. And, oh, by the way, we are in control of our emotions. Now, there may be reasons, be they medical, be they mental health, other kinds of things that enter into a picture that may clog someone's ability to be able to manage their internal controls. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be an understanding that we have the power, each individual has the power to manage and control our emotions. But controlling usually reflects more of what we are doing to someone else, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And at times, some folks don't recognize that they are controlling others, but we want to be able to begin to understand that there is a difference between self-control and, I'm sorry, I'm pausing because she's still having trouble hearing me. Kimberly, try turning the volume up on your end and see if that works for you. If you know how to do the volume on your end. And then just let me know if that's still not working for you. Okay, validation. Validation is important for any one person, and we want to make sure that we honor each individual for who they are, but particularly for young people. And as they're getting older and moving into being a teen, validation becomes important for different reasons for each person, but validation becomes important. So they want to be seen. And I don't necessarily mean to be, what's the word? To have someone with an attitude or self-aggrandizement. It's really just wanting to know that you see them and that you hear them and that they matter. So validating them is also important. Picking your battles. And this is huge because most of us all know who either have had children or raised children. We know that, we oftentimes can get stuck in certain situations. And I encourage you to pick your battles. What hill are you willing to die on? Take a look at how serious the situation is and determine what your outcome is that you desire and decide from that point whether it's a hill you want to die on. Some things, depending on what it is, we need to make note of it, highlight it, write it down, remember it, but you may not necessarily need to make it a huge battle at this particular time. And then there are other things where you certainly do need to address immediately, but I encourage you to pick your battles and determine what hill you want to die on. Missing the signs, and we often miss the signs along the way. And I just want to encourage you to understand that before the crises occur, before the major incidences occur, there were signs. And sometimes folks say, I didn't see it. I totally missed it. And that sometimes occurs when we're all too busy, when we are multitasking, when we are just wrapped up in so many things that we totally miss the signs, or we don't take time to communicate effectively with young people and we miss the signs. Because I guarantee you, before the crisis occurs, the signs were there. What did we do as the grandparent? What did we do as the team member, as the staff person supporting this family? What did we do? What did we miss? What are the questions that we should have asked? What are the behaviors that the child displayed? What are the things that were said? Because in some form or fashion, something was communicated to us, either verbally, through actions or behaviors, that we missed the signs. So know that when the big thing happens, we already missed the small things. So build in those things along the way to pay attention to, as paying attention is one of the key things that I point out here. And paying attention doesn't always mean that we need to question kids 50 times a day about things. But when I say pay attention, what I mean by that is making sure that we're honoring the journey for each and every child. If you have multiple children that are in your home, what's happening with one may not be happening to the other, and vice versa. Knowing that two individuals can go through the same experiences, but they have different stories, it's a real thing. So paying attention and understanding that the signs are there, paying attention to things that may change. Take notice as to when, your children's groups of friends drastically change. When you see that you have a grandchild that may typically have been always a social butterfly, and all of a sudden they're becoming a loner. Little things like that you want to begin to pay attention to, because again, those are all the things that can be setups for an array of different things. But you want to just be paying attention so that you ask the right questions when appropriate and seek the right supports when necessary as well. My family fact form, and this is a form that I actually developed for my family years ago, and I share it with others because what I found through personal experience, particularly in my years as a foster parent, when children were being moved, from home to home to home, and in some cases, foster children are in, maybe in 10 or 15 homes within a year's time. And with all of those moves, they are seeing different team members across many different systems, and in a lot of cases are being asked the same questions. And one thing that didn't take me very long to learn and to see was the impact to that child and or family by being constantly asked the same question in every room they enter in, by every staff person they enter. And particularly if they're being asked about experiences that weren't so pleasant for them, or a trauma that may have impacted that child and or family, and to be asked that same question over and over and over re-traumatizes that child, not intentionally, because we are doing what our role calls for by collecting data and developing a plan for them. But in the process of constantly asking some of those same questions, we are re-traumatizing. And again, not just children, this is for anyone. So I created this form, which just has some basic information on it that generally often doesn't change, like emergency contact information, phone numbers, information like that. And then it goes on down the list, and you can identify strengths of a child. You can identify some challenges. You also can identify triggers, things that may set a child off, or whomever the individual is that you're creating a form for. Each person would have their own form. You would also list medications. You could list service providers that may be involved. You could identify goals and expectations that you want for this person to be working on. And you can add most information that is pertinent to the individual that the form is being completed for. Why? This aids in providing information, again, in one place. It keeps everything all in one place so that when you're going to many appointments or you're working with multiple systems, you're able to not have to repeat the same information over and over and over again, as well as easily provides information for families so that one, the youth doesn't have to keep being re-traumatized or keep repeating the same information over and over again, or have to continue to hear the same thing over and over again. So it takes the pressure off the youth along the way. And it's also easy to update when changes do occur. You just grab a new sheet and apply the new information. And so I will share this handout with you along with the PowerPoint as well. So as we dig a little deeper into communication, we think about some of the things that our younger children are usually impacted by. And we talked a couple slides ago about the journey for teens and communicating with teens. But when we think about children in general, and in a lot of cases, our younger children, when we look at the impact of a life's journey, and when we think about grandparents raising grandchildren from the standpoint of this was not the choice. So meaning, let's say there was a parent who's terminally ill, and now grandparent has to step up and raise the child. So there are going to be some things that you're going to see along the way, and particularly living through the past almost 2 years here with COVID really has changed things as well. So understanding that youth communicate in different ways. Youth don't have command of verbiage to be able to articulate their thoughts and feelings to us. They may not be able to clearly identify what they are feeling. They may be filled with multiple emotions, and they may be confused. They may also be a young person who has been through a lot of trauma and have multiple different negative experiences. And those experiences have impacted one's ability to be able to understand that we have many different types of emotions. And what I mean by that is when you are dealing with individuals who have been through major traumas in their life, and more than one, generally, they wind up with one emotion, and that's usually anger. And so how they express those emotions looks different, of course, in every case, but we want to understand that emotions are something that young people tend to not be able to articulate. But how do you identify those emotions? Those emotions come out in their behaviors. And so understanding that their emotion may say one thing, but their behavior, excuse me, says something else. So for instance, on the graph, it says for anger, the child may be complaining about the remote may not be working, or the remote may be sticking in some point, or there might be a number that they're trying to hit on the remote that's sticking, and they lose it. And we feel like their response is way overboard, inappropriate, way too much, however we want to define it. But what they are expressing is anger, but not being able to communicate that effectively and or be able to say to you, this is how I'm feeling because of X, Y, and Z. And in most cases, that feeling that they express, or that behavior that they express, is totally unrelated to the incident that is occurring. So we want to keep that in mind along the way too. Thinking about youth and how they communicate, they prefer texting over conversation. And I'm sure most of us have heard young people say, text me, don't call me. I don't like talking on the phone. They prefer texting over communication. And so what does that say for us as grandparents? What does that say to us as staff? We better be understanding how to communicate via texting. And so there's a handout I have that I'll share with that too, that gives a list of, it's not an exhaustive list, but it gives a list of texting terms that teens tend to use so that we can begin to learn to understand the language of young people. Introducing the word no to their vocabulary, and for me, this is personally huge. And what I always say to those when we talk about this is no builds character. The word no builds character. And young people really need to hear the word no before they get to the age of 18. Before they embark in that real world as an adult, and they go out and they apply for the job and they don't get that job. Or they apply for a loan to get a car and they don't get the loan. So learning to hear the word no is actually a good thing when they're younger. And because that no builds character, but it also gives you an opportunity to help them understand that no just provides another opportunity to get to the yes. And that means that you have choice and you have opportunity. And what do you do with that choice and opportunity? But introducing the word no early on is important to building character for children as they're getting older. Asking the youth what they want. And of course, this is age appropriate and of course, based on situations. But it is important because youth have a voice as well. And understanding sometimes what they want, we may not be able to give them, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having the conversations with them to hear what they want. And then being honest about your decisions. And this is tough because sometimes we as adults, whether we are staff and team members working with families or whether we are the grandparents, we may not have the power to make those final decisions. We may not have the power to give that family the resource that they want or the referral that they want. As a staff person, we may not be able to support that family in the way that they desire for whatever reason, but we want to be honest with our decisions along the way and when age appropriate. And you will hear me say that a number of times throughout our presentation. All of these things, of course, are based on age appropriateness and by each situation, but we really want to understand that young people don't have command of verbiage to understand language. And so they're going to show us what their concerns are based on their behavior. Taking a look at technology and knowing where we are in the state of the world. And so most of us, not unlike myself, I love gadgets and I love the latest phone or the latest piece of electronic device. Well, no surprise, so do our kids. And so one of the things we also want to recognize is that technology allows our young people to communicate in different ways that may not necessarily be ways of comfort for grandparents. And so we want to be clear to understand and know what it is our kids are doing, what devices they're working with, what they have access to, understanding there's something called parental controls on almost every kind of device that's out there. And we want to effectively use those parental controls. And even in school settings, we want grandparents to know that in school settings and when students are using devices that are provided by and from school, there are controls that are built into those devices. There are websites that they're not allowed to access. And all of those things are set up in the devices, in most cases from school districts. But in our own devices in their homes, we want to make sure that we have an awareness of those things as well. Understanding that internet is almost a requirement for peace of mind is how I stated on our slide, but peace of mind in that having access to the world at large is important. And particularly if we are talking about generations between the grandparent and the grandchild, because there's going to be a difference in experience, there's going to be a difference in knowledge, there's going to be a difference in awareness of things. So we want to make sure as best we can, and we still know that there are areas across our country that are still not internet accessible, but as best we can, we want to make sure that there is access to internet. Encouraging creativity over the ease of technology. And what I'm referring to there is that technology is great and we all love it, but it also has taken away in my opinion, taken away the skill set of critical thinking for young people. Because when they can just hit a button or call on Google to be able to respond to everything, they're not using this noodle. And we really need for them to understand that it is great to have these technology devices, but when they break, we need them to have the capacity to use their noodle. So understanding that we want to make sure that we are still encouraging creativity and imagination and critical thinking while we're still accessing this amazing technology that we have and in the blink of an eye, we can have whatever information we want to have. But I'm sure most of us can think of experiences, for example, where we've been in some store checking out of some line, and the cash, something goes wrong with the cash register, and heaven forbid, the cashier has no idea what to do because they can't add or subtract if that button is not available or working to tell them what to do. So we want to make sure that while we love technology and use it, we want to make sure that we're encouraging them to still be creative, use their imagination, and those critical thinking skills are important along the way. And then encouraging limits when it comes to technology. And research does show that overstimulation with technology can lead to aggression. So, and more aggressive kinds of behaviors. And I saw it in my kids when they were younger with the continued use of technology, and when they have too much access and too much exposure, aggression can set in. So we want to be mindful of that as well. And then I threw this slide in to share with you because there are tons of apps that are available, particularly for families that have adults and or children with any specific needs. So for instance, on the slide, you'll see there are some apps there for dyslexic learners. There are some apps there for autistic learners. There's some amazing stuff that's available via technology, and we want to make sure that we are really taking advantage of all that is available and not necessarily having to wait for another resource to come in hand. So there's a list of several different types of apps that are available there for you. But just be clear that all of this is technology driven, and technology speaks a different language, and understanding that technology and language doesn't have a tone, it doesn't have a demeanor, it doesn't have an attitude. And so sometimes in working with our special needs populations, we really want to be aware of what they are being exposed to and what they have access to, because in language, while it is black and white on the screen or on paper, we're not able to really access a tone, an attitude, a demeanor that goes along with it. So just being clear about the impact of language on any one particular individual. And then I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but just computer safety, just some basic things for particularly our elder population to be mindful about not making assumptions. And because your child is sitting down and playing on that laptop or on that device, that you're just comfortable with the fact that they're not bothering you. You want to make sure you have an awareness of what they're accessing, what they are using, and making use of those parental controls. You're asking questions, and then you're giving age-appropriate guidance and age-appropriate access. Remembering to praise, and this is huge because a lot of cases, and in our own experiences with families we're working with, they don't get a whole lot of positive affirmation or positive support along the way. And so we get more bees with honey than we do with vinegar, and we know what that means. So we want our families and we want our young people to know that we care. And so providing that positive support and affirmation, recognizing growth and honoring that growth, no matter how small it is. And that growth doesn't mean that they had to achieve, for example, the entire goal. But if they've gotten one part of that goal right, we need to honor that, and we need to let them know. Praise and support and encouragement lends itself to maintaining and fostering accountability. And we know accountability is important along the way in the work that we all do, but particularly for families that are moving across multiple systems and have various plans and expectations and goals that they must achieve. Accountability is a huge part of that, and specifically for the individual who needs to achieve that goal. So that praise encourages accountability and it keeps them on track. They don't necessarily recognize that as the child, but we know that as the adult. Excuse me. So, and it's also a great self-esteem boost, and it's huge to hear that. And when I talk about praise and encouragement, I'm not talking about needing to go out and buy something for them. I'm not talking about anything that costs $1. It's all in the words and how we provide support. And I also will be sharing a handout that shares 101 ways that we can praise a child without spending a dime. So it's important to be able to take a look at that and be able to realize that we need to encourage. Oh, okay. So we're about halfway through at our checkpoint, and I just wanted to check in and see if there are any questions. Let me take a look at the chat box here and see any thoughts that anyone has. And you're welcome to unmute your mic if you have any specific questions about things we've already crossed at this point as well.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you go back to the page where you had the online information where they could do some online work for just, yes, that page, and make it a little bit bigger so I can take a picture of it?
Well, what I can do is, let me make a note and I'll share the highlight, the handout with you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Make a note too.
My name is Tanae Rankin.
Okay. We will absolutely share that. Any other questions? Oops. Let me look at the chat box here. Wanda says, I love that Microsoft have apps that can alert parents' phone when your child is using the internet. Absolutely. Absolutely. Social media has been a downfall for 2 of our children. Social media, we could spend a couple hours talking about the impact of social media. And while social media is important, and in some cases it has been extremely valuable in reconnecting families and allowing us to have ease of access to one another, using social media in a positive way has to be an intentional choice that individuals make, because social media can also be, as you say, can be a downfall for adults and for young people. And so the impact of social media has to be considered in today's current climate and in future use. And really, particularly for young people. And I know most of us have been hearing a lot about this lately, and specifically since, we're still living in a pandemic and really trying to figure out how to manage, quote unquote normal or our new normal, and understanding that social media can either lift people up or it can tear people down. And so we do need to really be thoughtful how we use social media, and social media can impact others, and we may not necessarily intend that. So it's important to always be aware of, while social media is important and it's necessary and valuable in a lot of the things that all of us do throughout our daily living, we also need to recognize the impact that everything that we put on social media has to someone else. And also letting our young people know that they think sometimes when they hit delete, that whatever it is that they've deleted is gone. That's what they think, but it is not. It might be gone from that device that they're talking about, but once it's already been submitted and out in the ethos, it's there. And so having that awareness is important too. Any other questions or thoughts before we continue to move on? Hearing none, I'll keep going because I want to respect your time. New ways of talking to children. And this is something that I particularly share a lot with our grandparents, because communication is important, and how we communicate and what we say and how we say it can impact the responses and actions of our children. And so you'll see on the left-hand side is a list of what they call negative characteristics, things like nosy, talk back, dependent, rigid. And on the right-hand side is a list of positive ways to see those same terms. And so when you are seeing those characteristics in young people, let's work to find a way to turn those negative characteristics or things that we say that have a negative connotation into something positive. And how do you do that? And again, it isn't always easy. And trust and believe, I've been there. I have spent years living crisis to crisis and understand the impact of sometimes you just can't see the light. And really understanding for families that there are oftentimes daily struggles and challenges to getting through the next half hour, let alone the next day. So make sure that we are recognizing the role that our language really plays and the impact of language and the role that we play as an individual in that process. And even as staff that are working with families and recognizing the power, and I use that word power intentionally, the power that we have as that staff person and that team that's working with that family, because we have the ability to impact the family as well. So what we say and how we say it is important as well. And self-care. And so I have a couple of slides that we're going to talk a little bit about self-care because it's something that has been more readily available in conversation, particularly during times of COVID because of all that has happened as it relates to that. But self-care is important because it's what you do for yourself. And particularly, again, I'm not really referring to the need to spend money in taking care of ourselves. I'm talking about how are we taking care of our body, how are we taking care of our mind, and how are we taking care of our spirit? What do you do for yourself? Do you take time for yourself? And in full disclosure, I talk to families about self-care all the time, but I will admit I haven't mastered it either. It is something that I think about and I still have to work on. I have not mastered it, so I'm always honest about that. But understanding, how do you recharge your body? Not your body, your battery. How do you recharge your battery? What are the things that you do to fill your tank? What are the things that you do that makes you happy? Because when we are in the trenches every day, again, as a staff person that's serving families or as a family member, we're in the trenches every day. And by being in the trenches every day, that's wear and tear on our bodies, that's wear and tear on our minds, that's wear and tear on our family units. And oh, by the way, self-care is important for little people too. And because we often have children that have crazy schedules, they're involved in so many things and they're on the go 24 hours a day, just like the grandparents are. So it's important for children to have self-care as well. Set clear boundaries for yourself. Learn to say no. And there's an art to saying no. It isn't easy for everybody. Some people can get to no very easily. Other people struggle saying no, but learning to say no will become your best friend. And then also recognizing that your body keeps the score. Your body really knows what's going on. You can tell yourself whatever, but your body is the one that is daily going through those experiences and really understanding the impact of what you're doing. And when you don't do self-care, are you taking 10 minutes a day to to do some meditation? Are you taking an hour a week to read a book that you bought 3 months ago and you haven't had a chance to read the book? Are you taking a half an hour a day and taking a walk? What are you doing for yourself to fill your tank? Because your family needs you, and not just the families we serve. Your personal family needs you as well. And your family is only as good as you are. So taking care of yourself is highly important. And I share this example that I actually, when we're in person, when I do this training, we actually do this exercise. So I'll share it with you, where I'll have you write yourself a letter. And in your letter, you're writing yourself 3 things that you promise that you're going to do for yourself in the next 30 days. Doesn't matter what those 3 things are. The only requirement is those three things cannot cost any money. So you're writing yourself a letter. You're sharing 3 things that you're going to do for yourself over the next 30 days. And when we're in person, then I will collect that letter and mail that letter back to you in 30 days. And when that letter arrives, you're checking in to see if you've actually taken care of yourself. Have you actually done the 3 things that you promised that you would do for yourself along the way? It helps you to get in tune with yourself, because we all know what happens if we don't take care of ourselves. Illness can set in. Burnout is one of those alternatives if we don't take care of ourselves along the way, and we want to make sure that we do that. And then what do you do to fill your tank? And this is a handout that I'll share with you as well. And, you know, writing down, because sometimes writing things down are helpful for some people. So what do you do to fill your tank? If you don't fill your tank, you will damage your health. And from a family's perspective, you lose the ability to see the future. And particularly for grandparents who are raising grandchildren, and depending on what circumstance has brought you to the place of needing to be able to raise your grandchildren, you need to be able to see the future. And we need you to be clear about that. And not taking care of yourself makes you unavailable to others. And so how good are you? How effective are you at being your best self and taking care of yourself? Some educational things to consider when we're thinking about grandparents who are raising grandchildren. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just some things to think about and consider that may need to be brought to the attention of grandparents who are raising children. So of course, determining the individual child's need. And again, every child's needs are different. Sharing pertinent information in the school setting. So what are the academic needs of your child? Are there medical needs of that child? Are there social needs? Are there emotional needs? You want to make sure that you are sharing those pieces of information with your school so that they can best serve your child. You know, there's a saying I like to usually always share: we cannot manage a secret. So if your child has a need and you keep it a secret, you can't hold the school accountable for not meeting your child's secret need. So no one can manage a secret. So if you want something to be addressed within meeting the needs of your child, you want to make sure that you make those things aware to the appropriate individuals in the school setting. Does the child have an IEP, an individual education plan, or a 504 plan? And oh, by the way, do the grandparents understand what these instruments are? Are there is there a clear understanding about what an IEP is and why someone would need an IEP or a 504 plan? Are there custody issues that have to be addressed? And sometimes working across multiple systems, we do have courts that are involved. And so we need to know if there are custody concerns that should be shared with the school setting so that they can follow those custody orders accordingly as well. Does the child have outside services outside of the school setting? We want to make sure that the school is aware of those things as well, because your child spends the better part of the day in the school setting, and we want to make sure that they have all the information they need to best serve your child. And then the importance of sharing that information across your teams. So if you are working across multiple systems, and even if you are only working with one system, you typically are working with, in some cases, more than one person. So you want to make sure that the team is aware of all of these pieces of information along the way as well. Act 147, and in your state and across the country, it is absolutely called something different. This was specifically what ours is called here in Pennsylvania, but it's the Children's Mental Health Law. And I won't spend a lot of time on that, but what that really means is that what is the age of consent in your particular state? At what age, if you have a consent law that says that a child is able to seek mental health services, if they so choose at the age of 14. In Pennsylvania, it's the age of 14. As we think about transitions, and what are some of the things that we need for families to be mindful of and thoughtful of when we're thinking about transitions? And there's a lot of information here on the screen, and I won't hit everything as our time is coming nigh. And so I do want to highlight just a couple of things to think about. And transition could be a separate presentation in and of itself, because there's so much that relates to transitioning and how to prepare for transitions. But when looking at and working with families and transitions, we want to think about how to plan. What is the plan, and planning in advance when possible? Sometimes things do come up, emergencies come up, and we may not necessarily have time to do so, but for as much as possible, we want to plan in advance. And for children that have special needs, and I added abandonment issues here because I had kids that dealt with that. And so you have to plan accordingly based on the specific needs that may impact the child and or family that you're serving as well. Be clear about your destination and why. And oftentimes that information may not be clear. But when we do know where, if we're talking about an out-of-home placement, or if we're talking about a transition from biological parents to grandparents, again, age appropriate, but having those conversations with those children are important along the way as well. And how you handle that transition will determine the success that child and family will have once they end up in the home with the grandparent. Being clear about the length of stay, if possible. Don't leave those open-ended situations there. And sometimes in foster care situations, those are the times when there may be some ambiguity around length of stay, but be honest about that when you can in age-appropriate conversations with young people as well. Discuss family communication times and visits. Will there be phone calls? Will there be physical visits? Will there be virtual visits? And who will be included in that, and how often will they be? Those are things that when determined can and should be shared along the way, so that all parties know where everyone's going to be and when. And then there's some things here just to think about along the way. The importance of knowing what you can secure in the way of services with private insurance versus having medical assistance, and the importance that one or the other will have or will play in accessing services. And in some cases for grandparents, this may be something completely new for them, and understanding that, having private insurance is important and always valuable. But in a lot of cases with private insurance, based on need and services, there are some things that are either off limits, or there are some things that may have some boundaries around them. For example, you may have private insurance and they offer therapeutic services, but there may be a cap on it. So there may be 10 per year that are allowed based on your private insurance. But what if you need 15? So understanding the difference in the role that private insurance versus MA plays along the way. Thinking about obtaining educational or medical rights. And when you think about, particularly in sort of foster care settings is what comes to mind initially first, but when you're thinking about grandparents raising grandchildren and not in the care of biological parents, you have to think of custodial kinds of situations, and you have to think of medical and educational rights, because they matter. Who gets to make those decisions for the children matters. And then answering the who, what, where, why, and how is important as well. And I won't walk through those for the sake of time, but being sure that we look at those. And so I mentioned this a little briefly earlier, but as we think about the role, and in this case, I'm specifically talking about staff here, who are you and what are your highlights? And what I mean is, what is your story? Because when you show up in the room with a family, all of you shows up in that room. So whatever your experiences are, whatever challenges you've had in your life, whatever trauma you've had in your life, all of you shows up in the room, and all of you can and will impact the experience for that family. And so I wanted to really point out to all of us that serve families the importance of doing our self-care and taking care of ourselves, but understanding where we at on our own personal journey, because we have the power, and again, I use that word power, we have the power to influence families, and how and where we are on our own personal journey will impact and show up in the work that we do with families. And so I bring this up to say, what are you doing with your own stuff? Are you taking care of your own stuff? Are you addressing your own stuff? Are you honoring your own stuff? And oh, by the way, in the work that we do in serving other families, there's something called vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. You will be traumatized by the work that we do with others. How do we manage that? How do we handle that? Are you owning that? For sure. So we want to make sure what role that we play in each one of those families that we encounter on a daily basis. Do we know our own personal triggers? Do any of the experiences with the family we're working with, does it trigger us? And sometimes when we recognize that, or if we find that we're in one of those situations, we have to take care of us while providing what's best for that family. It may be the time where we have to say to our supervisor or to our boss, I'm struggling here in this situation. What adjustments can we make? And that may mean that you might have to hand that family off to someone else. You might have to pull someone else into the situation, but what are you doing with your own stuff? What role do stakeholders play? And you'll see my little picture here has a wheel with a bunch of different pictures on it that indicate different types of stakeholders, and really wanting us to recognize and own the role that stakeholders can play in the work that we do in supporting other families and understanding, and understanding the role and the importance of stakeholders. And because oftentimes I'll be working with families and recognize that no one's really owned the fact that, this family has a network. This family has, supports that are around them, whether they're community supports or family supports or supports from the church. But take a look at the stakeholders that are available to work with the family and include them in the process of the network where appropriate and where fitting, and allow them to help build the goals for that family, because in the end, they will be the support to that family achieving and maybe moving through the plan within your system, or maybe exiting your system. Allow that network to support that family, and allowing them to do so will make things a little bit easier for you as well. Staying woke, and what I mean by that is just a couple of things. It's having an awareness and knowing, one, who we are and what role we play in impacting others, and even impacting others in our own personal families, not just whom we serve. Staying woke means that if we are paying attention to each and every child and or each and every person that we are serving, it allows us to remain one, available and emotionally available. It encourages us to take care of our own stuff. Again, your own stuff is important. Don't feel guilty about taking care of yourself. And oftentimes we do as family members. We put everybody else before us. It is okay for you to be number one in this particular case, taking care of yourself. And oh, by the way, make sure that we're asking our kids how they're doing. Not assuming because everything is going along and they're going to school every day and the work's getting done that we're not checking in. We have to have those crucial conversations with young people too. The way in which you ask those questions, of course, are different based on the age of the child, but don't be afraid to ask those questions and have those conversations, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Quickly, some highlights just around mental health. As a lot of us serve in this system in some capacity or another, and we know that mental health in a lot of areas still has some stigma attached to it, and we want to recognize the importance of taking care of ourselves as well. And when I say take care of ourselves and self-care, and we're taking care of our body and we're getting our yearly physicals and all that kind of thing, I want to encourage us to also get a checkup from the neck up. Make sure that we're taking care of what's going on with our mental health. And you see some of the statistics that are there, and those statistics were pre-COVID. So those numbers probably have greatly changed, and we want to recognize that there is stigma attached to mental health, but everybody needs to take care of mental health. Whether you have a diagnosis or not, doesn't matter. We all need to take care of our mental health, and everybody occasionally needs a mental health day where they just need to just do nothing. They need not be responsible for anything. And understanding that statistical data around mental health is off the charts. And by the way, it's off the charts for kids. And understanding that our young people are hurting. Again, pre-COVID was the case, but certainly mental health has become more common conversation because of COVID and the impact of isolation and separation, all the things that we've experienced over this time. It's important to recognize that it is a challenge, and then know for communities of color, we are those groups of people that yes, have stigma, but two, are less likely to access services or have an awareness of service. So we want to recognize the role that communities of color play with this as well. What does true family engagement look like? And I'm sure we've been in many settings where we talk about family engagement. And there is a difference between family involvement and family engagement. And we don't have time to get into those differences today, but understand the value of family engagement and the opportunity it provides to us in doing the work for those of us who serve families and for the families who are actually going through the experience. And so what true family engagement does for us, it allows the family to feel included. It brings purpose and value to the work that we're doing. But most importantly, when families are truly engaged authentically, it provides for smoother transitions when transitions have to occur, and also almost guarantees successful outcomes, which is what we're looking for families and youth. And then my caption here that I love to share in understanding that who we serve and understanding the role in which we play in serving families, but also for the families that are living with children that they are serving as well. And so I use this picture to give you an example of usually when someone is entering your room. And so you see on the picture here, this side profile of this young man that is smiling and grinning. That is who you usually see when you enter a room, whether it's a child or an adult. Just picture that. That is who you usually see when you put on your best self. You're smiling, and that's usually who the teacher is talking to. That's usually who the principal is talking to. That's usually who the social worker is talking to. That's usually who the case manager is talking to, that young man that is smiling back at you. But I challenge you to see the inner person on the inside of his brain, which is usually who you need to be serving. So understand that the person smiling back at you isn't always the authentic person that we need to really be serving. So think about who stands in front of you. Think about whom you're communicating with. Having an awareness that there is a difference is going to play a role in how successful you can be in this journey as well in your impact. So I want to jump to the slide that I added a couple of things to the questions at the end for someone, a couple of you that had posted some questions on the app in advance. And as we're wrapping up, I want to just offer you the opportunity again to either post questions in your chat box and in a second here after I share this, you'll be able to open up your mic and I'm willing to take questions as well. So someone had asked a question about what resources were available for grandparents in the Nebraska area. And I quickly did some searches there and posted a few things here in this slide that's available there in Nebraska. So for that individual who posted that question, I thank you for the question. And there are a few things that are there. And then someone asked a question about recognizing financial challenges for grandparents who potentially are starting over, meaning that taking on their grandchildren would be something new for them. And this is a piece that is often not recognized and thought about, but financial challenges are something that are really important to really think about the impact. Because if you remember the stat I showed and shared in the beginning indicated that at least in Pennsylvania, 20% of our families, grandparents raising grandchildren, were living below the poverty line. So financial impact is great as well. So I want to recognize that we are a couple minutes past our time, and I'm not sure what time your next session may start, but I'd be happy to take a question or two if you'd like. There is my contact information. You're welcome to give me an email or a call if you have any additional questions as we move on to our next session. I want to thank everybody for their time today. I want to thank you for your input and the work that you do for families. I'm personally grateful as one of those families that have been served over the years. And I love the role of being able to now serve families and support families along the way. And I thank you for your time and feel free to reach out and connect at any time.